Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of RPGs with Paddy. I'm Paddy. Today we'll be looking at the third edition of Cthulhu by Gaslight, published by Chaosium. Before we begin, if you like my videos, don't forget to give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you want to see more Cthulhu by Gaslight stuff. I would really appreciate it. So, let's get started. This is a supplement for Call of Cthulhu to help you play in late Victorian era or Gaslight era, so the 1880s and the 1890s. This is the third edition of Cthulhu by Gaslight, and it works with the 6th edition of the Call of Cthulhu rule set. This third edition is heavily based on William Barton's original edition, which came out in 1986, and was reprinted with only minor changes in 1988. So this third edition came out in 2012, over 20 years after the second edition. This remake was helmed by Kevin Ross, who seems to have been working with Chaosium for a long time. He was credited as far back as 1984, I think, with the first Masks of Nyarlathotep, and he's done many since then as well. Recently, he released a very popular scenario on the Miskatonic repository called The Dare. I haven't had a chance to run this yet, but from all accounts, everyone is really, really happy with it. So that's who is at the helm of this edition. So back to the source book. There will be no spoilers in this review, so players and keepers can watch it freely. The book contains 4 main sections. There is character creation, there is the Victorian world, there is Strange Britain, and then there are the Gaslight adventures. There are 2 adventures, Night of the Jackals and The Burnt Man, both running at around 25 pages. After that, there are 2 appendices. Appendix 1 has sources for Victorian role players, a list of things to help get you in the mindset of Victorian England. And the second appendix only has the maps and the handouts. To keep this review spoiler-free, I won't be looking at the Gaslight adventures now, but I will have separate videos for both the Night of the Jackals and the Burnt Man. Equally, we won't be looking at the second appendix, which has maps and handouts for the adventures. So, let's get started. In this first section, we look at how to create a character. So this requires, doesn't require, but you should kind of use the Call of Cthulhu 6th edition rules with this. 7th edition is also fine, it's very similar. But we get an 8-step process. First, decide your occupation, then roll for your statistics, then place your statistics in the desired order, roll for your age and effect, determine your skill points based on your int and your education, roll for a trait, which is new, and allocate skill points, but not to your credit rating. And then finalize your character details. So most of that is fairly standard, but I'll point out the changes that you have to make. When you are rolling for statistics, you can just do a straight roll, but it also includes a sexist option, and that's the words of the book, where you can reduce both the strength and the size of women investigators by 1 point to present a more realistic version of men being stronger and bigger than women. To compensate for this, you can take those 2 1 points that you've taken off the women and put it into their intelligence, dexterity, appearance, or education. I did hear someone complain that it would be unrealistic for women to be educated, but actually female education was, especially for kind of more upper class people, was very prevalent there as well, and women were very women and men could both be very well educated at the time. They had kind of like separate tutors. I think mostly the topics that they learnt were different. But if you want to include this for more realism, check with your players if they're all cool with it, go with it. But I think it doesn't really add a huge amount because, the players would like, if you're playing, it's kind of like a mechanical thing, but it doesn't help the role playing, and the role playing is always the focus for me. If I have a female character and she was meant to be strength 17 and now she's strength 16, I don't think that's going to affect my role playing too much. Just one thing to keep in mind, because this is working with the 6th edition rules, their stats range from like 0 to 20, whereas in 7th edition everything is multiplied by 5, so it ranges from 0 to 100. So minus 1 point in 6th edition is the equivalent of about minus 5 points in 7th edition. Apart from that, you don't apply your skill points to your credit rating. Instead, your occupation decides if are you upper class, middle class, or lower class, and then depending on that, you will roll dice to see where you fit in that class. Are you higher upper class, very, very wealthy, or are you kind of like middle, lower class? And then that will affect your credit rating. So on to occupations. We get 26 occupations here, which is a big expansion on the 11 we got in the 2nd edition. So 8 of them are the same as was in the 2nd edition. The ones that are the same are the adventuress, who is basically a woman from a lower class who is dating a man from a higher class. And as long as they're dating, she kind of assumes his class, as long as they stay together. Irene Adler is the example of this from A Scandal in Bohemia, one of the Sherlock Holmes stories. The other ones that are carried over from the 2nd edition, the other occupations, aristocrat, clergyman, consulting detective, ex-military, explorer, inquiry agent, and policeman. They're all the same, and I think they speak for themselves. But there are 18 new occupations here for Cthulhu by Gaslight. So there's antiquarian, that's a very Lovecraftian one, someone who deals with antiques, or maybe a museum curator or something like that. Artist, author, a cab driver. There's more information about cabs later on, and of course this will be a horse and cart kind of handsome cab. You could be a craftsman, a criminal, a dilettante, which they describe as someone who has come into money through inheritance or investment or just work, but there's no title associated with it. So higher class people kind of look down on you because you're not of good stock. Your family hasn't proven that you deserve to be up here with this wealth. You could also be an entertainer, a journalist, a laborer, a lawyer, a spy, a thief, a professor, a physician, a scientist, a servant, or a shopkeeper. Did I mention soldier? Soldier is also in there. I mentioned soldier, and I mentioned thief. Thief was not meant to be in it. That's from a different game. Sorry. But 3 professions have also been removed since the 2nd edition. Inventor is gone, but that kind of fits into the scientist role now, because scientist is quite broad. Rogue is also gone. Rogue is someone usually from an upper class rich family who ignores all the rules, the laws, and social norms that go with their status. And the last one, I'm not surprised that this is gone, is street Arab. I think this was, it's a term, I looked up the term. It was it was never very common, but it was most used back in the Gaslight era. And then it kind of almost disappeared. It had a brief resurgence around World War II, and then practically gone again. So yeah, you can use it if you want, but I think it's one of those ones where the term, because no one is familiar with it, I certainly wasn't, and I'm from Ireland, this British term, if people aren't familiar with it, it's more likely to cause problems than it is to, create an immersive experience. So in the 6th edition of Call of Cthulhu, in the main rulebook, they had drifter as an occupation. So if you want, I would say just go with that. In 7th edition, we have Drifter and Hobo, and you can figure out what exactly you want from this. So those are the occupations. After that, we get a totally new aspect to Call of Cthulhu at this time, at the time of printing, which is a set of traits that you can use to make your character a little bit deeper and more profound character. So there's a huge list of 120 traits, and you roll a 1d6 and a 1d20. So you could get a 5 and a 13, and you look up that result and it gives you that trait. So there are 120. I won't read them all to you here, but I'll just give you a quick overview of a few select ones. So we have ambidextrous, which means that there's no penalties for using your offhand for something. I found in my games this would be irrelevant because I'm not going to worry about such minutiae as giving them a penalty for using their offhand. It's too crunchy for me anyway. Another one, you could be athletic, in which case you get plus 30% to one skill, which is a huge bump, or you can get plus 20 to 2 skills or plus 10 to 3 skills. I think the math, I'm not sure if this is intentional or not, but it should be plus 30 for 1, plus 15 for 2, or plus 10 to 3. But, maybe that was intentional. Clumsy is a -1, which doubles all of your fumble chances, and any fumbled skill rolls result in a mishap of some kind. So anytime if you roll too badly, usually, if you get a 100 or if you get somewhere over 95, but now this would double it for all of those. So bad things will happen much more often to you. You could also be crippled, in which case you might be missing a limb or an eye or an ear. And and it's kind of randomly rolled. If you are missing an eye, for example, you get minus 35% to spot hidden, to using your firearms, and to all other sight-related skills. That's pretty rough. You could also have, I just pointed this one out because it's, I'm not sure if it's a misprint or just kind of an oversight, but dark ancestry could be you're descended from a bad family, from cannibals, from unearthly creatures, or, worst of all, foreigners. So I'm sure that this is, I guess it's a bit thematic as well, because obviously Lovecraft wasn't a big fan of foreigners, but I think for a modern game like this, kind of lumping cannibals, unearthly creatures, and foreigners into one section was maybe a little bit not the best option. I imagine they'll change that, or even just rewording it could be better. They also say roll a D100 there, and the higher your roll, the worse your ancestry is. So maybe they're saying something like, at the lower end, where it's not so bad, is from like a bad family, or, from a foreign family, which among like the class system might be looked down upon. And then 2 examples at the upper end, like the worst you could be would be descended from cannibals or descended from unearthly creatures. But just the wording is not so clear there. The way I read it was that kind of putting them all on par or in the same bracket. Another one, you might not get a trait, but you get to add 3d20 to any skills. There's 2 great role-playing ones here, I think. One is owed a favor. So someone in the campaign owes the investigator a favor, and the keeper, it's totally at the keeper's discretion as to what it is, but they should inform the player as well. So the player knows someone owes them a favor. And the other one is that the investigator owes someone else a favor. And again, it's at the keeper's discretion for the details. So when it comes to traits, and obviously that's just a handful of the 120, and there's almost no repetition. I think there's like 5 of them. No, sorry, no. So like 3 of them have repetition. So a wide variety. I think there are some good points and some bad points. First of all, I love that they're introducing this new thing in Call of Cthulhu, because up until now, traits weren't really an aspect of the character creation. I believe this was the first time it was introduced. I could be wrong. But when players are creating characters, usually you like to make, strong, competent characters, especially in games like D&D, where you want to be the hero, you want to, overcome all of these difficulties. Call of Cthulhu is really well suited for, flawed characters or people who aren't expected to succeed in everything. So having some of these be, negative traits is fine. But if you have to kind of get your players on board with this as well. You're going to be rolling. It might be good, it might be bad, but kind of explain to them this will make your character, a deeper character. It'll be better for role playing. We'll get better stories from it. But you could also get like big differences between the players. Like, for example, one person could get plus 30% to one skill, which is great, and another player could end up losing an eye, and then they have minus 35 to spot hidden and all other sight related things, including firearms. Spot hidden and firearms are very important things. You might not have both of them being good, but you'd want at least one of them to be good for Call of Cthulhu. So that can, as long as your players are okay with that, I might let my players choose a trait, because I want them to play the characters they want to play. Also, some of the traits are great for role playing. For example, the last two I mentioned, owed a favor and owes someone a favor. That is really, really great for working your character into the story of the campaign or the adventure you're going to be running. On the other hand, some of them are just once-off bonuses to your skill. No trait, no role-playing hooks at all. So this idea of traits was also adopted in Call of Cthulhu 7th edition, the main rulebook, but focusing more on just role-playing rather than mechanical differences. And in the 7th edition Investigator's Handbook, we see experience packages where you get some positives and some negatives. For example, if you are in a war, you lose some sanity, but you become immune to seeing sanity from gruesome events, and you get some extra bonus skill points as well for war-related things. So I think maybe that's the more polished one, but this is where it started, and it's good, but I would say just talk to your players a little bit in advance and possibly be a little bit flexible on some of these as well, or maybe get them to roll 2, choose one. But yeah, it can really help create, deeper characters as well. So after that, we just get a few small notes about some changes to skills. Credit rating is now different. It depends on your class. You don't just assign skill points to it. And so you'll be rolling to see what that is. Drive automobile is not relevant, and it's replaced with drive carriage. Electrical repair, the base stat starts at 10% in modern 1920s Call of Cthulhu, but now it drops down to 1% base skill for all characters because electricity is not very common there. Operate heavy machinery focuses mostly on trains and so steam locomotives and stuff like that. And finally, pilot, I think it's just pilot, is changed to pilot balloon. So you know how to pilot a hot air balloon. I think that's interesting and very pulpy as well. I can't remember any scenarios actually making use of this. Some of them might have mentioned it in passing, but I don't remember it being an actual part of a scenario. But I'll be going through the catalogue of the rest of the Gaslight adventures, and if I find anything, I'll come and I'll leave a note here, as long as it's not too spoilery. So after that, we get a decent and rather concise section on weapons with some nice illustrations and a price list. The price list might be a bit confusing now because they haven't explained prices, but we'll get to that in a few pages. After that, we get a totally new section, quite long, well, a few pages long anyway, a glossary of some Victorian era terms. And I think this is really, really useful. Some of them are just British English terms still in use today, and others are, I think they died out after the Victorian era. I didn't know them anyway. And this is a great list for getting into the spirit of the game, and it can be really immersive. I also don't think it's too distracting or it will slow down gameplay at all. I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the underworld slang. After this, we do get the prices explained to us. So the important things are you have pounds, shillings, and pence are the main ones. There's also a list of coins, but those are the main denominations. A pound is usually denominated? No. Pound is usually written as just the pound symbol, whereas shillings will be written as S dot, S period, and finally penny is denoted with D, not P, D, from the Latin denarius. And so there are 20 shillings in a pound, 12 pennies in a shilling. And we just get a little bit more on that, including 3 more pages of sample prices. If you need more equipment and stuff like that, you can check out the Miskatonic monograph, the Gaslight catalog equipment list. This one, which I will be reviewing in the future. We also get a section about clothing with the exact same pictures as the 2nd edition. So after this, we get some information about the Victorian world and the different colonies that were controlled by England during the 1800s. So some of the sections are quite small, just 5 or 6 lines on like China, Australia, Canada, New Zealand. Places like Kenya, Chaosium already had a separate source book for Kenya, so there's not so much information here. But then other sections in Africa, for example, Egypt and the Sudan, Southern Africa, West Africa, they all get longer sections, and the Caribbean also gets a reasonable section as well. After that, we get some links between England and the rest of Europe and America, but just a quick overview, really. Next, we learn a little bit about the Victorian military and the Navy. Things like nepotism being rampant, the poor and the criminals were used to shore up the numbers, and the conditions were pretty awful. There is also, at this stage, we get a 3-page list of kind of major events happening during the Gaslight era from 1880 to 1901. And this is great so that the keeper knows some major events that are happening in the year that their adventure is set, and they can kind of have the locals talking about it as well, or it's a talking point anyway. It helps to immerse the players and also to create a more realistic world. So speaking of which, we also get introduced to a number of famous personalities who were living at the time. And this says it's mostly the same as the 2nd edition, but I think it's been expanded a little bit. Some famous people that we get to meet, and of course this is at the discretion of the keeper, but just some examples for you would be Lewis Carroll, Benjamin Disraeli, Gilbert and Sullivan, the opera playwrights, Arthur Machen, the Cthulhu mythos writer, Bram Stoker, who wrote Dracula, H.G. Wells, War of the Worlds, William Butler Yeats, among others. These really help the keeper fill out the world and help the players get into the Gaslight era mindset. So next we get an overview of different large sections of London. So like the city itself, the city enclosed by the walls, Westminster, the East End, the docks, and a few other locations. I would definitely give this information to the players because if they're going to be playing as people who live in London, they should have an idea about, for example, The East End has a lot of the poor people, and there have been generations of lots of foreign people from different countries living here. If they go to Southwark, that's where you can get, food shipped in from different places around the world. Somerset House in Westminster has lots of good records, and research can be done there. And all of this just helps the keeper build a consistent world, and the players, not saying, oh, where might I be able to do that? But they actually might know it themselves from reading this. After that, there is a breakdown of a number of London locations. This is almost exactly the same as the second edition. As I mentioned before, some locations get longer entries. The British Museum is the longest one, and it also gets a full map, which I think the map is updated since the second one. It's a better map. But most of the entries just get a few lines. In the second edition, I pointed out that Gray's Inn only gets described as one of the inns of the court. And again, it's the exact same description in the third edition here. It's not very helpful, not for me anyway. But I kind of hope that Chaosium keeps it for the upcoming new version, just so I can point it out and make fun of it again. After that, we get a very short list of stores in London for like books and jewellery and clothes. I think that this could warrant a slightly longer section, especially on books, and occult and mythos bookstores would have been really great here. If you're looking for a little bit more on that, I would highly recommend Bookhounds of London. It's written for Trail of Cthulhu, which is a different rule set, but most of it is rules agnostic. Like, you don't need to. It's just a good source book. So definitely check that out. I will be reviewing that at some point in the future. Too many videos to review, or too many books to review. But yeah, definitely worth it. After that, we get some information, a sidebar about the London fog, and this is new to the third edition. And it tells you when fog is most likely to appear, and what happens when the fog appears. What are the mechanical effects? And the keeper is given the advice to save foggy conditions for times when poor visibility will increase the horror for your players. There's light fog, heavy fog, and pea super, which is a very thick fog. I would say don't only bring out the fog when it's going to be an attack or something like that. Then your players will associate, oh, there's fog, we're going to get attacked. Have the fog come in and every now and again, and sometimes it's an attack or some horror incident, and sometimes it's just fog. That'll keep them on their toes. After that, we get introduced to different regions of Britain. First, we get a very small section talking about the accents and how upper class people, in any region will pretty much sound the same. They're speaking proper English, whereas the differences in accents are much more noticeable among the lower working classes. Especially they mentioned, for example, the short or long vowels in words like grass might be said gross, or bath and bath. It's just an example. It's not so long. I think that might have been extended out a little bit more. Could have been nice. But I guess you can look up accents yourself. And then we get little short sections of the different regions and a quick look at their culture. Places from like Cornwall, Yorkshire, Scotland, Wales, Ireland, and a lot of other places as well. Quite short, but yeah, a good quick overview. The book recommends, if you want more information, you could check a guidebook from the era, but getting guidebooks from, over 100 years ago is not so easy or cheap, but can't be helped. Then we get a section talking about travel, and this is very similar to the second edition. It starts with long boat journeys like transatlantic ones. For me, that's never been relevant in Gaslight. I like to keep it mostly in England and Ireland, Europe anyway. so those long distance ones aren't relevant. But if you're bringing over characters from America, then we move on to more personal transport, such as horses and bicycles, and saying that cars were practically non-existent. There is a very nice section here on hansom cabs. I mentioned before, a cab driver is a new occupation here, so it's good to get a little bit more information about the cabs and the two-seater and the four-seater and how the cab driver acts as well. Obviously, your player doesn't have to act that way, but just an idea of what's normal in this situation. Of course, the underground is very important. It's a great subway system, but at this stage, the trains are still mostly traditional engines, not electric. So the underground system is very sooty and heavy with smoke when you go down there. Up next, we learn a little bit about the different methods of media and sharing information. The telegraph is probably the best. There are telephones, but they're not so common, and the connection can be a little bit bad. Newspapers, however, we get some extra information about newspapers in this edition. They're saying that there were about 500 different newspapers in London, and gives us some nice information for the Echo is a more liberal one, whereas the Times and the Evening News were conservative, and Illustrated Police News is a sensationalist newspaper. They had an artist's depiction of Mary Kelly's desecrated body the morning after her death. So she was the final victim of Jack the Ripper, allegedly. All of this is such great information to help the keeper build a really immersive world, and also helps them to set up adventures and campaigns where you might be getting different views of information from different newspapers. And of course, with 500 newspapers, all of them want your attention as well. So, what are they publishing? Great, so then we move on to crime and law, and both of these sections have been expanded a little bit. One thing that I think is nice that they've added is talking about flash houses, which is kind of like a gang headquarters. So if you've got, if your players are playing as criminals, this could be good, or if they're, playing more official, law-abiding citizens, or potentially even police, then this could play into it quite well. When you're walking the streets of London, you have to be careful, or else you might get mugged or pickpocketed. And it mentions in the book, especially as the players are kind of distracted by occult or mythos threats, they might not be paying enough attention to notice the more mundane threats on the dangerous streets of London. So we find out again, very similar to the second edition, about the police. So Scotland Yard was not, all-encompassing at this stage, but they did have the Metropolitan Police, and they worked in conjunction with the London City Police as well. We also get new information about the Criminal Investigation Division, and a special branch of them dealt with, I presume it was considered terrorism. I'm not sure when that phrase was coined anyway, but there was an attack on Scotland Yard in 1884 by Irish nationalists, ended up blowing up part of Scotland Yard. All of this is explained in the book, just briefly, but it's interesting. And this helps build up, along with other things later in the book, it can build up this growing tension. And maybe if your players are of Irish descent, so like your characters are of Irish descent, you might start to notice people being a little bit more wary around you, not wanting to let you stay here, not wanting to share any information with you. So all of this really helps make a very immersive game. So after that, we also have the exact same page of underworld slang. So as the second edition, I mentioned this when reviewing the second edition. It's great. It's really well researched, and there's a really nice vocabulary there. My problem is, I think it's too difficult to include in actual sessions. I think it will more likely lead to just confusion among the players and slow down the keeper who can't, unless you know, memorize all of this or even a few words, um, kind of slow down your reactions to this. It can be used by criminals to identify other criminals, just to check, are you really a criminal or are you just pretending to be a criminal, by using some of the lingo. So I really like it thematically. It's very, very well researched, but practically, I'm not sure I could implement it well in my games, unless me and my players all kind of sat down and dedicated some time to kind of learning some of these, or at least my criminal players. Next, we talk about the London underworld. So, of course, prostitution. I think it had just become illegal, but it's still very widespread. There's also, this book talks about quite an uncomfortable topic about what the age of consent is, and some kind of newspaper stories at the time, including, you know, white slavery, where white women were kidnapped and sold abroad to rich foreign buyers. Pornography started appearing at this stage, but it was outlawed, but it's very difficult to stop it, with printing being so easy. Homosexuality is illegal, and people are often blackmailed about it. That could be a plot point. Oscar Wilde was famously sentenced to 2 years of hard labor for being gay. And so this helped create a secret society of gay people. They had to obviously hide who they were. And again, that could be an interesting point to explore in a campaign. We have lots of secret societies and different groups. So yeah, you can add in some extra confusion there. On the other illegal side of things, there's also in any pub or, you know, lots of places, there will be backroom sports, even if they are illegal, and some of them will be legal, but stuff like dog fights, ratting, which was news to me, is where you try and get dogs to kill rats, but like for sport. Bare knuckle boxing, which I think started to be on the decline now as it started to get into more regulated boxing. So a lot of those things are illegal, but drugs are completely legal, and anyone can just walk into a chemist, buy some cocaine, buy some morphine. Opium dens were kind of growing in popularity, but you know, it's not proper to be seen at the opium dens as well. It's mostly for foreigners, especially Chinese or other Orientals. Great. So after that, there is a separate sidebar about the most famous criminal of the time, Jack the Ripper. There's a lot of detail here, and it talks about who some of the suspects were, linking them potentially to the Freemasons and the royal family. And there's lots of other suggestions here if you want to read more. Even if you don't intend on including Jack the Ripper in your games, I would definitely recommend reading through this sidebar. It's very good information. And so after this, we learn a little bit about the government system. We learn about the change. There's the figurehead of there's the monarch at the top, who is mostly a figurehead, and then Parliament really does a lot of the ruling. We hear about a few of the changes in Prime Minister that happened at the time, from 1892 to 1895. William Gladstone was in power, and he wanted to introduce a lot of more liberal legislation, liberal and progressive, and he was interested in social reform, but he was also a big supporter of home rule for Ireland, which meant that, you know, Ireland would be able to govern itself, and actually that's what led to his downfall. Again, all of this can be great background information to really set the setting. After that, we learn about the different royalties and titles, which of course is important in the Gaslight era. Then we get some information, which is a new section about clubs in London. So these are mostly gentlemen's clubs, and we're given quite a nice list of them. Not bullet point list, but just within the paragraph. and they can really be for any interest. So any shared interest that you have, there's probably going to be a gentleman's club for that. There are also ladies' clubs as well, but mostly men and women stay separate. So for, full immersion, I would probably keep it like that. If that's going to be a problem with your group, of course you can just kind of bend the rules, or have them in as a guest, have the female investigators come in as a guest, and possibly that has some negative consequences for your male players. But I think actually keeping them separate is very interesting role playing, because if you can split the party, you can get different pieces of information, and then that helps you put it all together. And then we get some information about different hotels and lodgings and markets and bazaars in London. It mentions again where can you get information as well. So I mentioned Somerset House has amazing records for anything you could want really. So definitely mention that to your players. There's also information about the opening times and stuff like that of public libraries and museums and some universities. Of course, we talk about like Oxford and Cambridge, but also about different ones around the country, including Scotland and Ireland. And there, finally, in this section, we get the coach chase rules. These are great. Really, really nice. They add in a lot of thematic incidents. For example, the wooden wheel on your hansom cab can crack. Harnesses for the horses can break. And there's a suggested list of actions, crazy actions that you might take in the middle of a chase. For example, jumping from one carriage to another, jumping from a carriage to the horse, trying to climb around the outside of a vehicle. All excellent, excellent fun. So definitely worth including in your game. The 7th edition of Call of Cthulhu has excellent chase rules. But these ones for Cthulhu by Gaslight 3rd edition, while not so well defined from rules, thematically they are great. So I think when the new edition of Cthulhu by Gaslight is released and the solid chase rules are mixed with the very immersive situations and suggestions from Cthulhu by Gaslight, I think we might have really amazing rules for a coach chase scene. Okay, so now we're on to the final major section for this video, because I won't be reviewing the adventures here. I'll avoid going into too much detail about the secret societies, as keepers may wish to keep that part secret from your players, or gradually reveal it through play. But basically, at this time, interest in Egyptology, Neo-Druidism, Atlantology, so about Atlanta, and other kind of occult practices were growing. We get a lot of detailed information about many different societies, such as the Theosophical Society, Freemasonry, the Golden Dawn. There'll be more videos coming on the Golden Dawn in the future. Spiritualism in general, and the Society for Psychical Research, not physical, psychical research. And yeah, I think the information that you have here is really good, and just reading through it kind of inspires a lot of scenarios. You're like, wow, okay, this society is doing this. That will easily lead to another scenario, or I have an idea for that. After that is a brand new section talking about strange sites in Britain. There are 45 listed, which is great, and they're spread across the different isles. Unfortunately, we only get 2 each in Ireland and in Wales. We get 10 in Scotland, 7 in the north of England, 9 in London and the east, 11 in the southwest, and 4 more in Cornwall and the west. Reading through these are just like famous strange sites around the country. So they really again give you these great ideas for how you can create Cthulhu by Gaslight scenarios. The only thing I would have liked is just a few more in Ireland and Wales, because I know they're steeped in great strange sights. Another new section we get here is a kind of an overview of locations around the country and the history of different mythos creatures appearing in Britain, talking about like serpent folk to the little people, and much, much more. Just kind of giving you an overview. Then we get a separate section specifically on the Severn Valley, which is based on all of the writings of Ramsay Campbell. And this includes quite a nice map showing the layout of the different places as well. Probably much closer than I would have expected. But after this section, then we get very specific details, including stat blocks as well, for some, about Cthulhu mythos entities in Victorian Britain. There is a slightly longer section, extended information, about the little people and about a great old one, Rogog. But there are many, many creatures listed here, which will really whet your appetite for new adventures to bring horror to your players. And then after this, I have quite a long section of fictional characters set in this era that the keeper can use at their discretion. We got people like Captain Nemo, Count Dracula, Jekyll and Hyde, of course, Dorian Gray, the infamous Fu Manchu, Phantom of the Opera, and of course Sherlock Holmes, among many, many others. I think a lot of people don't want to use fictional characters in their games, and I mentioned this a little bit before in my review of the second edition, because using fictional characters can kind of break the immersion, but I do appreciate having the information here. And if you want to use it, go ahead. If you don't. But I think maybe a little bit more advice in each section on how to include these characters would have been nice. So, for example, Sherlock Holmes is a consulting detective. All of your players are essentially playing detectives of some, like they're, trying to research or figure out a mystery here is the whole conceit of Call of Cthulhu. So it seems very easy that you could bring him into the campaign. But how am I going to bring in Count Dracula? Of course, I have ideas, but it would be really nice if they gave some suggestions there, just to start the creative juices flowing a little bit. And after that, after using the fictional characters, then we are gifted with 22 fully statted NPCs for the keeper's convenience, and all of them are from different occupations, different Gaslight occupations. So, and there are some non-traditional Gaslight occupations here as well. So great selection, so the keeper can easily just look at this and pull out a character fully statted with not so much time. Now, it doesn't talk about the characters' personalities either, but just in case you get into a fight that you weren't prepared for, you can pull out one of those. And finally, in this section, we get some suggestions for how to run campaigns. I found most of this information a little bit vague. It does direct you to check out other publications for Gaslight, such as Dark Designs, Sacraments of Evil, and Pagan Publishing's Golden Dawn, which I think has 4. And it also talks about how you might be able to adapt the 1920s adventures for Call of Cthulhu, just move them back to the Gaslight era. And at the end of this, we also get a nice little bit about how to use hauntings in your own adventures, because obviously hauntings are a thing very associated with England as well at the time. So that's the end of section 3. After this, there are 2 adventures. I will be reviewing them separately with big spoiler warnings. So there'll be a video on Night of the Jackals and a video on the Burnt Man. At the end of the book, in Appendix 1, there is also a great bibliography to help keepers and players kind of immerse themselves more in the Gaslight era. There's sections on fiction from the era, modern fiction about the era, other modern fiction of interest, and Cthulhu mythos set in Britain. There's also a list of some non-fiction sources and a list of film and TV Victoriana. This is a really, really well researched list, and it just shows how well versed the authors are in this topic. If you want to help yourself get in the mood for Gaslight, create better Gaslight era games for your players, I highly recommend checking out this list and seeing what aspects kind of pique your interest, and that's the kind of game that I want to run. Okay, I just before I wrap it up, I'll just point out that a big section that was omitted, or that was in the second edition, was omitted here, was time travel. I think that felt very out of place for me in the second edition. It was kind of forcing you to move your players from the 1920s to this time. They decided to leave that out completely in the third edition, and I approve. I thought I didn't see myself using it. Giving your players powers of time travel is dangerous. Great. So that is the end of the review. I think this is a huge upgrade on the second edition. Now, that is not to say that the second edition was bad. I really liked the second edition. But the third edition does also owe a lot to the previous editions, because it was based on those, and a lot of the information is still the same. But this third edition, I think, kind of addressed most of the flaws of the first two, and the adventures, which I will be getting to soon, are much improved over the Yorkshire Horror. I just couldn't really get behind that adventure as it is. If you're interested in playing in the Gaslight era, the newest edition, so like the fourth edition, will be coming out probably sometime next year. So that's 2023. It might be 2024. They haven't released the release date yet. But I think so. I know role playing has become much more popular, and the quality of Chaosium's products has skyrocketed. So looking at the first and second edition versus this third edition, huge improvement. But this was released with the sixth edition of Call of Cthulhu. The seventh edition of Call of Cthulhu, the quality of the products is impeccable. So I think the fourth edition, upcoming hopefully next year, maybe the year after, is going to be a must buy. Just a prediction. But if you can't wait that long and you want to get started, no reason why you can't get started. You can buy the PDF of this third edition from Chaosium directly or from DrivethruRPG for about $15. I think it's definitely worth the price. It's slightly cheaper if you buy it directly from Chaosium. Links are down in the description. If you wanted to buy the physical product, keep an eye out. Noble Knights Games sometimes has it, but it's out of stock at the moment. And it costs about $100 on eBay. That was the cheapest I could find at the moment. But I think the PDF serves absolutely fine. Great. So if you liked this video, please give me a thumbs up on that. I will be reviewing the 2 Gaslight adventures from this book and a lot more Cthulhu by Gaslight stuff. So if you're interested in that, please subscribe so you can stay up to date with it all. Okay, and that is it for today. Have a great weekend, everyone, and I'll see you next time.